Thanks everybody for tuning in, and this is the third meeting of the work group on pandemic spending. I believe our previous meetings have been particularly enlightening, have produced meaningful insights as we continue to analyze our state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm emphasizing here the federal dollars that have come into the private and public sector, which have been enormously game-changing and helpful, but which obviously are of great interest to Maryland and national taxpayers. So today we've received presentations from the Department of Budget and Management. My good friend Secretary Brinkley sent over his top 8, and we appreciated that. The Department of Housing and Community Development and the Department of Commerce, who sent equivalents to our speaker today from the Department of Labor. I thank them for participating in our work group meetings as we fulfill our legislative charge. This is something that has been mandated by the legislature to provide oversight and accounting of pandemic relief programs in the state of Maryland. I want to reiterate my strong support and the strong support of our staff for the infusion of federal and state monies into our economy. I think in retrospect that this relief was crucial in staving off an economic disaster. It was a lifeline to millions of Marylanders who found themselves out of a job, on the verge of losing their homes, struggling to put food on the table, through no fault of their own. Frankly, in many cases, I believe even more relief was necessary, especially as we learn about inequitable distribution and demand far outpacing available dollars. I also believe that with so many taxpayer dollars being dispersed, it is both morally and fiscally prudent that we continue to evaluate these transactions to guard against waste, fraud, and pandemic profiteering, while ensuring those who need the funds, the ones who actually need the money the most, ultimately receive them. This work group continues to do the important work of oversight and accounting for the billions of taxpayer dollars that have been spending over the past 16 months. Just like every work group meeting, this hearing is open to the public. I believe it's on Facebook. And we're there in person so that Marylanders can see firsthand how their money, their tax dollars are being spent. Today, we will receive a presentation from the Department of Labor, the agency responsible for the disbursement of state and federal aid, specifically through the mechanism of unemployment insurance. I'd like to welcome David McClung. David, welcome.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor. Mr. McClung, we look forward to your report and the question and answer period that follows. It is my intention that following today's meeting, Maryland taxpayers will have a clearer understanding of how much aid the Department of Labor has distributed and how much remains unspent. What is the cause or causes of the breakdown in customer service, and why issues persist even after hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency contracts were granted to supplement staffing levels? How much fraudulent activity has the department encountered? Who are the primary sources of fraud, and what measures have been put in place to combat further schemes? Once again, I want to thank the Department of Labor for its presentation and thank Mr. McClung. With that, if you could give my regards to the Secretary when you see her. And if you could just give us your presentation, and then we'll have some questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Controller Francho, Deputy Controller Bernardi, and the members of the panel. Thank you for the time to be here today. And we'll start right in with where we are with Maryland and the numbers.
Feel free to speak up and
yes. To date, we've received over 2.8 million claims in unemployment and paid out over $13 billion in benefits. We have adjudicated over 3.9 million claims and implemented 10 brand new programs in the unemployment insurance division. We've added 2,168 staff, and 1,776 in the call center, 292 adjudicators, and over 100 state staff along the way. Our virtual agent has had 4.6 million conversations with a claimant population. And in addition, we've averted 6,000 layoffs through the work sharing program and saved 21,000 jobs through the layoff aversion fund. I'll talk more about that later. This is a chart that gives you a little bit of background on the ramp up that we had in claims. As you can see, the chart starts out in 2019. And in all of 2019, we had 171,000 claims. Then, just from March to December in 2020, we had 1.4 million new claims. And you can see that spike where there were times that we had well over 100,000 claims in 1 week. The peak in the Great Recession was 6,000 claims in 1 week. So, and as I said before, as of July 17th, over 2.8 million claims have been filed. This gives you a little bit of background on 2021 and what the claim volume looked like, peaking at 50,000 claims in 1 week. And so far, we've had 547,000 new claims in 2021. And you can see how a typical week might break down between regular unemployment insurance as well as the PUA program and PEUC. We give this to you graphically to show you how we processed claims. 5,000 claims have been processed so far, and the breakdown is 82% have been paid out. We've had to deny 126,000 or 15%, and we've got 21,000 claims pending or 2% of that total. This chart gives you a little bit of background on the payout and where it went. $7 billion went to the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. $1.6 billion went to PEUC, which was the extension program. Regular unemployment, we paid out $4.5 billion. And then the smaller extended benefits program paid out $46 million. A little discussion on fraudulent unemployment claims that we've found. And so far, with, I'll say, our aggressive and heightened security measures that we placed in the new system, the Beacon system, we've flagged 1.5 million, over 1.5 million claims for fraud. And we've broken that down for you in what we flagged from out of state as well as in-state. And 1.2 million in-state and 348,000 out of state. But of those claims that were flagged, we determined that 92%, or 1.4 million, were fraudulent. And then about 100,000 after review were passed on. And we still have 19,000 that were still under review. We'll show you that for you graphically that the vast majority, as we said, 92% of those claims that were flagged as fraud are fraudulent. This gives you a little example of some of the things that we encounter. We ask people when it's flagged for fraud to send in some identification to understand that they are really who they say they are. These are some examples of what we got. Someone used a celebrity license, or a picture of a celebrity on a license, Chris Hemsworth. And even on the Social Security card, they didn't even bother to sign the same name that was on the card. So we get anything and everything on this. We have many ways for people to report fraud to us. We have an email address, ui.fraud@maryland.gov. If they think there's an issue, they can contact our benefit payment control unit and give us the information on that. In some cases, people were surprised to get a 1099 form that they didn't expect. And then we've got an email address where they can get that remedy, and we will correct that 1099 form for them. In some cases, people have found that their Bank of America debit card has had fraudulent activity, and there's a phone number, a 1-800 number, they can contact Bank of America to follow up on that fraud. And then again, not to be left out, are our employers. We've got a portal in our beacon system for them, or they can contact us at our 949-0033 number. We message our claimants on things that we do and don't do in helping them to avoid fraud and scams. And these are a list of some of the things that we will never do. And we will never ask or require a payment for assistance with unemployment insurance. And we want to remind our claimant population that is something they should never do. We do not provide assistance to claimants through direct messaging on social media platforms. We never arrange for an adjudication or a fact-finding interview through any teleconferencing platform like Zoom or BlueJeans. And we don't provide assistance through text messaging or send any links, and never ask a claimant to verify their account through text. We will never ask for a claimant's bank account number or credit card number over an email, and we will never request a claimant's password, or the beacon password, and we will always communicate with them through our @maryland.gov email address. We've come across a number of fraudulent social media accounts, Facebook pages and the like. So we work with law enforcement to try to shut them down, and Facebook. We found over 49 fraudulent Facebook pages since January of 2021. One of the things we tell our claimant population is to be on the lookout. Oftentimes there'll be misspellings in these social media accounts, and we give an example up here of the misspelling of the Department of Labor, where it's obviously a fraudulent account. One of the things that we do is want to warn our population about fraudulent phishing scams. And one of the things that we do is put out information that shows that these are not legitimate text messages. We would never text a claimant with this kind of a thing with a link in it that goes to a fraudulent account. And we want to make sure that they pay attention to whatever link they click on, that it has that Maryland.gov. As far as staffing goes, we have ramped up. Prior to the pandemic, we saw the claim load was very low, and this federal funding formula doesn't give us enough funds to ramp up as quickly as we might have liked. But we worked hard as quickly as we could, added vendors and hired 1,776 call center agents, and added 292 adjudicators for staff augmentation. Our workforce development program has also assisted a lot of our population. We were able to use the COVID-19 layoff aversion fund and provide 2 rounds of grants to employers in the state of Maryland. The first round awarded $10 million to 445 small businesses, saving over 8,800 jobs. The second round, in October of 2020, awarded over $21 million and supported 822 small businesses and saved over 12,000 jobs. And this funding was very flexible. It was provided so that people could get remote access and promote teleworking. We worked with employers so they could provide training and education to their employees, as well as cleaning services to maintain an on-site workforce. And then some employers also used our work sharing program, which I'll talk about in a moment. This graphic shows where the money was distributed in the layoff aversion fund, and we were happy to say we could touch all 24 jurisdictions within the state of Maryland. You can see most are concentrated in the center of the state, but we did get into Western Maryland as well as Eastern Shore. There are additional workforce programs that we have used during the pandemic. There is our registered apprenticeship program. And in 2020, we were happy to say that we reached a record of over 11,000 registered apprentices in the state of Maryland. And that's not the only program. We've got a youth apprenticeship program so that it's not all about babysitting and cutting grass for people in high school. They can actually sign up for juniors and seniors and earn while they learn in a youth apprenticeship program. We've got those in 20 out of 24 jurisdictions in Maryland. And hopefully we'll get all 24 soon. Also, our American Job Centers, we have 32 of those around the state, and those are reopening, but they offer services for individuals and even employers. Over 49,000 claimants have completed workshops with our American Job Centers. Probably the linchpin of our workforce program is the Maryland Workforce Exchange. This allows a job seeker to apply for jobs. They can create a resume, explore careers, training opportunities, and the like. And there are over 250,000 jobs listed on the Maryland Workforce Exchange. Another one of our workforce programs is the Earn Maryland program. The Earn Maryland program is relatively new, but it offers job training to industry-driven sectors. We work with employers to find in-demand industries like biotech, manufacturing, and cybersecurity. And since the program's inception, more than 5,300 underemployed individuals have obtained employment, and over 8,500 incumbent workers have received training. And then we've got a book sharing program, which is a nice addition to this portfolio, if you will, because this allows an employer to be flexible. Instead of laying off someone and retaining someone, he can reduce hours with some of his workforce and supplement that with unemployment benefits, so to say. And when it works out well for everybody. They can keep a trained workforce. We've had 549 plans since March of 2020, and that's with 367 employers and saved an estimated 6,117 jobs. One of the things that we continue to do are job fairs. We've done them virtually. We've had 228 job fairs since the pandemic began, but now we're ready to pivot and do those not virtually, but in person. We also continue to offer veteran services, people transitioning from the military, including their spouses. We want to make sure that we get priority of services to these people and make sure that we can help them get employed in the private sector. We also have our Maryland Reentry initiative, and that's statewide, designed to assist returning citizens by increasing their employability, in some cases, even assisting them with federal bonding. This is a summary of some of the workforce development grants and funding that have gone out. And in the $75 million allocated by Governor Hogan and the legislature this past session, that's going out to our American Job Centers to increase training programs all across the state. We had over $37 million in Title I funding that came in to provide services for adults, dislocated workers and youth. We continue to support the EARN initiative to the tune of over $8 million and $7 million in Relief Act funding to support the state's 13 workforce development boards, and over $2.8 billion in a COVID-19 dislocated worker grant to provide eligible individuals for employment as the economy reopens. We have a number of spaces on the Department of Labor website where we've got frequently asked questions in the unemployment section, all the way from appeals to work search and everything in between. In addition to that, we've got video tutorials to explain how to use the Beacon system, how to file a claim. how to navigate the system. And lastly, we don't leave out our employers and our third-party agents with the video tutorials, and all of that is up on our website within the system. So thank you for listening.
Deputy Secretary. So I appreciate that. It's a tremendous number of slides, and we're going to take everything under review. And I appreciate your presentation and, frankly, your presence here. As you can imagine, this subject of unemployment benefits, which has been viewed fairly or unfairly by millions of people in the state as somewhat of a fiasco. This is not to suggest that you didn't have all sorts of emergency situations. But the upshot, frankly, is that it's a program that has all sorts of questions about it. And millions of Marylanders across our state that have been affected by the pandemic, which brought the economy to a halt, many of them happen to feel that has not been a smooth process. And we have a lot to get through today. We have a lengthy list. I have a lengthy list of questions. I believe my colleagues who are leadership of the Comptroller's Agency also have questions as well. So if I could just go over, Mr. McClone, a few of your data points. You mentioned how many unemployment claims have been filed since the commencement of the state emergency. Right, is that number?
2.8 million.
And how much money, both state and federal, do those figures represent?
The 13 billion.
And how many unemployment claims are still waiting for adjudication?
We have 21,000 in that we've processed, but we also have another 19,000 that are still awaiting. They have a fraud hold. We're still looking at those.
Okay, and how many months have they been in that so-called adjudication mode? 6 months, a year?
That I don't have that answer, but I'll reach back and find it.
Thank you. And obviously, customer service is incredibly important to us here in the Comptroller's Office. As the tax administration agency, we understand that you need to be in touch with people. I think Governor Hogan, at least personally, has always communicated to me that is a huge priority for him. My office, even though we're not your office, daily receives emails from Marylanders desperately seeking assistance with their unemployment claims. I'm not talking about a small number. I'm talking hundreds of them. Most of these folks know that our office has nothing to do with unemployment, but they say they simply cannot reach anyone from the Department of Labor to discuss their issues. So I'd like to just read a few recent examples from just a couple of weeks ago. The first email from Jeffrey reads, I have been awaiting my review for 7 months. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been awaiting my review for 7 months and have been escalated to the highest level of urgency for over 4 months. I've called the agency 25 times and there's nothing they can do other than to escalate again. Another email from Stephen. My unemployment benefits have not been paid since May 19th of this year, and I'm completely out of money or options. I've talked to several agents and caseworkers about this, but seemingly very few people can even tell me what is going on. Please help. I've got one more from Brooke that reads, while I understand I'm not the only unemployment claim, I do not understand the lack of assistance I've experienced. Not having access to my benefit payments is affecting my livelihood to the point where it's also affecting me mentally, watching my debt accumulate and feeling unsure if I will have a roof over my head next week. In capital letters, all capital, can someone please help? So we do help, and we're able to communicate as a sister agency with your agency and get some access to these folks. But these are the most in need individuals all over our state. There are low-wage workers who have been without any kind of employment because of this unbelievable pandemic. And I guess understandably at the start of the pandemic, I can see the kind of traffic jam that you understandably had a difficult time dealing with, just the volume of it. that tsunami of unemployment claims from Marylanders who have been laid off or furloughed through no fault of their own, I guess I'm concerned that the department seems to struggle to answer the phones and emails even now in a timely manner. And you've entered into this series of emergency contracts to provide staff support and a wide range of services to improve efficiency. By our staff's account, Mr. McClone, the Department of Labor has entered into emergency contracts with 8 companies totaling $185.2 million. Is that in the ballpark with what you think?
I would say that's in the ballpark.
So I don't know if this is the extent of all the emergency contracts, because we continue to see a parade of these emergency contracts presented to the Board of Public Works months and sometimes, in some cases, a year after the contracts were entered into. But let me take just one. It's a contract with Accenture, a national consulting company. Cost the state $102 million to provide 1,275 temporary call center staff agents to assist with hundreds of thousands of calls from Marylanders, some of whose emails I just quoted from, who are struggling to receive their unemployment payments. So we have 1,275 temporary call center staff full-time. Were they full-time?
Yes.
And doing the math, this one contract equals $80,000 per call center staff. It's pretty high, I suggest, but obviously there must be something else built into that. Can you give us some more information on what work was provided by Accenture?
Well, I know that they have a model of training that they have to put these staff through, as well as management, I'll say project management staff that they have to bring on as well to manage all of that. So I can get more detail on that for you, Controller, but I don't want to talk off the top of my head, but I know that there's a lot more built into it than just the agents.
Thank you. And on average, how many call center staff did Accenture make available to answer phones from Marylanders regarding unemployment issues? Ballpark.
Well, I know it's well over 1,300 because we've increased that contract since, I think, the time that you mentioned.
Okay, and if you could tell me a little bit about the call center's metrics. A year and 4 months since the beginning of the pandemic, what's the average call wait time now?
Well, once they're in the queue, it's gotten down to 4 minutes. So it was up at 18 minutes, but it improved that.
And once they get into the queue means what?
But because we have a limited number of agents, if we get 500,000 calls in a week, not everybody's getting into the queue.
Okay, well, maybe you could get us information on that number, because if you can't get into the queue, that obviously, if you're concerned about having a roof over your head, food on the table, that can be pretty frustrating, I think. I didn't realize there was that kind of a queue. So let's just, if we could, talk adjudication for a moment. In February, we approved at the board level a $70.9 million contract with a company called Alorica, to provide emergency augmentation staffing assistance to your division to clear the large backlog of claims. How many temporary staff persons did that company provide for that purpose?
That was the 292 that I quoted.
Okay. Apparently, some of these individuals were interviewed by Fox 45, and they complained that they weren't trained properly. That's kind of a distressing message if, in fact, it's true. Can you kind of briefly walk us through what kind of training was provided?
Well, I know that there's at least a 40-hour training session that all of these staff will go through, and in some cases it may be longer, but I will certainly get details on the training for you. I know that's something that we are really emphasizing right now, pivoting to adjudication as much as possible to clear out this backlog of issues that crop up and so that we can get people paid.
Great, if you could get back to us on that, that would be great. And based on our agency's experience with potentially fraudulent tax refund claims, obviously there are methods and tools and procedures that enable rapid and accurate adjudication of claims. What type of policies and procedures did you generate at the agency to guide the employees that are working on adjudication on that train, that full? What, did the company produce the 40-hour
No, we
curriculum,
worked,
or did you?
our adjudicators worked with them to get them the training.
So what kind of policies and procedures did you generate that might have helped these employees?
Well,
Who
I will have to get you more information on the level of detail within the training. I mean, I know that, for example, work search issues have been suspended, so until recently, but during the height of the pandemic, we didn't have to worry about work search issues, so that they were trained so that they didn't have to dig into things like that. But it could be a separation issue.
Okay, good. I'll get back to some of that. The General Assembly also, you mentioned, established the unemployment insurance grant program through the Relief Act, which provided $1,000 grant payments to claimants who have been waiting to be adjudicated for at least 30 days. So both Department of Labor and our office were involved in this, and Labor's role was to identify the individuals who qualify and would be paid out $1,000. And our role as the state's paymaster was to print and mail the checks to the folks that Department of Labor identified. With the grant fund now exhausted, I'm actually very pleased to share that the Comptroller's Office processed payments to 40,237 Marylanders, totaling $40.2 million within just 48 hours of receiving the recipient files from the Department of Labor. But I just want to get some clarity on this, because your department, and this perhaps may be a small issue, but your department tended to forward inquiries about this grant program from folks wondering why they weren't included to my agency. And we had to tell them, no, it was you guys that selected the recipients. Given that, and what that is and continues to be thousands of Marylanders waiting adjudication, how did you guys decide about the 40,237 Marylanders that were receiving the $1,000, and I guess everyone else who's calling us?
Well, I know they ran that week after week to anybody that had more than a 30-day window on that claim, but I will have to reach back to the programmers and find out exactly what criteria was used.
Great. Let's move on to the layoff aversion fund. If memory serves right, this fund was established by the governor last March. It was to provide immediate financial assistance to employers in an effort to prevent layoffs and foreclosures. According to the press release from your department, this past March, more than $31 million was awarded to 1,267 small businesses. How many applications did you receive, or was that the total universe?
No, I know that there was more than that, and I will find out exactly how many were. But I know that they had to screen them to make sure that it was a legitimate application.
And did the department screen and give special attention to MBEs or WBEs, or what were the criteria for reviewing the suitability of the grant?
Well, I know it had to be within the parameters of what I mentioned in terms of the uses of the money, but beyond that, I will find out exactly how they were spent.
Yeah, how about certain parts of the state that were most hard hit by the pandemic? Was that a consideration?
Again, I don't have that information, but I'll find out.
Thank you. It's my understanding this grant program received 2 rounds of funding from the governor, one last March and one in October. So theoretically, the department, by the time October rolled around, I think could have focused on parts of the state that didn't get their fair share from the first round. They're looking for lessons learned from this, I guess. Because looking at the map of where the grants went, I see one grant went to Caroline County. One. And that's a county it's a great county. I love Caroline County, but they must have had more need than one grant award. 3 of them were awarded in Kent County, 4 in Garrett County, which is bigger than most states, and 4 in Dorchester, one of our most needy counties down on the lower shore. Can you give us any insights as to what type of prioritization could be done for industries or jurisdictions that have been left out in the early rounds? these programs?
Again, I'll have to find out how the criteria was raised, as well as how many applications came in.
Okay, and did you follow the funds at all as far as whether they were utilized appropriately by the recipients?
I understand there is going to be some follow-up, but I don't have any data that says how it was actually spent. We distributed the money, but I understand that they were all subject to an audit. So I'll find out if we've got any of that done yet.
Thank you. And did the department uncover any fraudulent payments to companies or fraudsters, I guess, that were pretending?
Not that I'm aware of right now.
And last but not least, because this is the major subject, the issue of unemployment fraud itself. As you know, fraud detection and prevention is something that's a top priority for the comptroller's office because we're constantly assaulted by people who are trying to loot the Maryland Treasury by submitting phony and fake tax refund requests. So this is something that we are expert in and struggled for years and are constantly managing. Well, put it this way, it's a top priority for our agency. Fraud has been unbelievably rampant in the pandemic, according to the national press, mostly because that's where the money is. I was pleased to learn that the Department of Labor uncovered more than 1.4 million fraudulent unemployment insurance claims from your testimony. I believe that's the number. But I just want to find out from you, were these detected, blocked, and not paid out?
These were detected and blocked. These have not been paid out.
Okay. I know from my agency's experience that some fraudulent claims are easy to detect, as you indicated with the couple of items that you had up there, while others are far more sophisticated, and we've seen a proliferation recently of synthetic identities that require very nuanced approaches in the fraud detection systems. We also know from collaborations with the U.S. Attorney's Office that much of the sophisticated fraud that we're confronted with is perpetrated by foreign criminal organizations and even terrorists. Could you just summarize, I know you had one little quick reference up on your screen, but could you summarize one or more of the perpetrated schemes that you uncovered?
Well, I would say that most of this is I don't want to talk about something I'm not familiar with, but I know most of it is generated through false identification. And whether that's part of the foreign ring or not, I don't have that information. It certainly could be. But I will say that one of the things that we've done is ramp up our effort by using a vendor, LexisNexis, to help us with identity authentication and whatever tools they can bring to bear, whether it's checking out an address, a phone number, or even an IP address. They're working diligently and have far greater resources than we have.
So if you could ask your staff when you go back to the agency, and I would like to have, to the extent they can, share some of these specific schemes that they uncovered in this large universe of 1.5 million or more fraud detections that were made. I want to know how it evolved over the last year and a half, because it's been a considerable period of time. I'd like to know how much was perpetrated by folks from outside of the U.S. borders. And I'd like to know, I guess I might ask this of you, what fraud strategies did you have in place when the pandemic arrived a year and 4 months ago? What was in place in the agency?
Well, we've always looked at foreign IP addresses with a great deal of skepticism. So we've always had that tool in our toolbox. I'll say multiple use of the same address is another one that we've used over time. And some of those things that were, once we brought on the new system, the new beacon system, we were able to increase some of that through data analysis. But even after that, as you can see with these numbers, we we had to even up our game from that and brought on another vendor to help us do that. I would say that we had discussions with your office, Andy Shoffley, about sharing data and sharing information that we want to continue to try to make sure that we get more sophisticated in this fraud detection and prevention area. So that we engaged a little bit earlier in the winter, and we're going to bring those discussions back to make sure that we can share as much data as possible and prevent as much fraud as we can.
Well, we're ready, willing, and able to partner with you on that. And we extensively use data scientists, all sorts of very sophisticated additional help to Mr. Schaffel and Mr. Hildebrand, Deputy Comptroller Bernardi, and our entire team. We have a fraud detection section in the agency, risk management, and we're constantly consulting with independent consultants and others, but particularly trying to stay ahead of the bad guys. So I hate to use the analogy you're closing the barn door after all the important animals have escaped, but you may be in that situation. And I guess that arrives at my last question, which is how many and how much money was actually paid out to fraudsters? I understand how much was not paid out. That was, that's a wonderful talking point. And I appreciate the fact that that is held up as somewhat of a shield. But how many fraudulent claims have been paid out, and what is the total cost to the U.S. and Maryland Treasury of the 13 billion plus that you folks have processed?
Again, that's something that I don't have that answer at the moment. I know it's being assessed constantly. So I will go back to their staff and find out exactly what they've learned so far, because it's going to be an ever-changing number, as we understand, because new things are uncovered all the time. So we will get back to you with as much information as we can share.
Excellent. And I'd also like to know what dollar amounts from the federal government and state government. Obviously, I don't want to know in public, but I want to get some sense of how much money is sitting in banks right now that has not been allocated. And I would, well, you understand from the press what our estimates are for misspent money. And I guess the question is, other than working with us prospectively down the road, what is it that are the major lessons that you may have learned about preventing fraud in this particular sector, so that future agencies are less vulnerable to what has occurred to you and other Department of Labors around the country in different states?
I think you mentioned it earlier, the analytical tools are key. That's something that we've learned and we're ramping up every single day in our agency.
Well, I mentioned the word fiasco, and I don't mean to be personal. I appreciate your ability to come here and say you're going to go back and try and get information that is important. The process is, I know my colleagues have some questions that are probably more specific than mine, but I'm grateful that you came, and we're started to, we're going to pursue this with a lot of vigor, because we've got to know what the reality is. It can't be some kind of press release that says we've done a great job, because we know, along with every other Department of Labor around the country, that there's been an enormous assault on the public treasuries by fraudsters in this area. And we just need to learn the facts so that we're more prepared next time, if God forbid it ever happens again. Here's the Deputy Secretary, so please, Sharon, have that David. He's in the hot seat, so he's perfectly comfortable.
We need to give him a chair.
Yeah.
It might be one.
No, thank you and welcome. And actually 30 years ago, May the 17th, I started my state career with the Department of Labor. So I do appreciate the work that you do there. I am the state's lead, when I say state's, we have a national ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and just wanted to know if the Departments of Labor have any type of collaboration that's similar to that. Just so I know that we are very much interested in partnering with you to help you utilize the tools that we've been using to identify fraud nationally.
We are a member of an organization called the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, and they have as part of their something called the Integrity Data Hub, and they share information with all state agencies, state Department of Labor agencies across the country, or unemployment insurance agencies, to be more specific. So that's we use their tools as much as possible and incorporate them into the legal system. But that's one avenue that I can say that we certainly use that in addition to all the other vendors we might contract with.
And related to the vendor question, the Departments of Revenue, some of them also use LexisNexis, the Accurate program, and I didn't know if that's the program that you're referencing for your authentication process. I think there are the two components. You can do it as a lookup as you enter a system, and you can validate that way, but then there's also a batch process too.
Right now, we're using the batch process, and we are working towards a live integration.
And when did you first engage with LexisNexis?
I would have to go back and look, but I think it was in early July.
Oh,
So 2020.
2020?
Or 2021, excuse me.
2021.
There's my analogy, closing the barn door after a lot has occurred. So we're not trying to necessarily dig at something that is, has caused obviously a considerable vulnerability for the state and national treasuries. But I do think we need to know what the numbers are, and I appreciate you being here tremendously. But tell your folks that we need the facts on fraud, because otherwise, we're going to find the numbers ultimately, but we really need them to come up with the precision that they have advertised how many they have detected and not paid out. Obviously, they know right now exactly what fraud was paid out. So we need that in order to understand the significance. And once again, it's going to be applied prospectively as good lessons learned. But we're concerned today that despite you being here, which I'm very appreciative of, this information it's not a mystery. You guys have it, we need it. And please impress that upon your colleagues when you go back. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the deputy comptroller. I just want to make sure that people don't think this is some kind of, gee, this is all okay. No, it's not all okay. We need to learn and improve from our mistakes like this. I'll start with David Hildebrand and then move to Andy Shuffle and then.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I did want to try to dig into a couple of the numbers. As the comptroller just mentioned, trying to figure out what that fraud number is. The best information I could find is based on the Benefit Accuracy Measurement Program. Are you familiar with that, sir?
Yes.
Okay, so from 2017 through 2020, Maryland had an improper payment rate of just over 18%, where the national average is 9.17. I know a lot of that was work search related, but then as I'm drilling into it, what I'm trying to find is for improper payments to organized bad actors. The comptroller was asking, it doesn't break out identity theft versus, straight out fraudulent filings versus that. Is there any breakdown of that part of the information that goes into the accuracy measurement? Or is it just the one fraud?
And it's a large conglomerate. conglomerated number. It's not an individual breakdown. I think the way they do this is take individual cases and then do a statistical sample and extrapolate to the entire population.
So within labor, do you all have an idea of how much is organized identity theft versus people who are just, the one-offs, or a Maryland taxpayer who just filed a bad, application? Do you all have any of that breakdown?
I will find out if we do. My impression is that given the volume, that it's more than a one-off.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to.
Get you more information.
Do you know what the recovery rate is for improper payments? How do we do it getting money back?
That is one that I know is difficult, but I will find out how quickly what our retainment rate, because I know that statistic is out there.
Excellent. Now, before the accuracy measurement program was suspended, which I believe was March of 2020, they had indicated the fraud rate portion had went from 1.97 in calendar year 19 to 9.48% in just the first 3 months for 2020. Do we have fiscal year 2021 figures? Have they not restarted that? Or when will we have that new number?
We don't have that because it hasn't been restarted, but as soon as we get information like that, I'll pass it along.
Do you know, are they going to go back and cover the gap here, or are they just going to start again from now?
That I don't know. I'll have to find that out.
Okay. And as the comptroller mentioned, I'm sure you've seen some of the reports in the last 6 months on the PUA fraud. Some stories are 30%, then it was 35%, then a couple of weeks ago was one claiming 50% of all PUA funds were fraudulent. My first question is that because the federal program allowed self-certification, or is it more complicated a problem than that?
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think the fact is that we've said that given the volumes that we're seeing, it's probably more than one-off. Within it, the rules are intended to get quick payments out, and depending upon how honest someone might be in answering questions, that we'll find out later if they're being truthful.
And you hit on some of it earlier, but I want to make sure we kind of nail this down. From those lessons learned, during that first part, we had talked, I think it was January this year.
Right.
And could you go kind of over at a high level? I know you can't give details. What are those additional steps, things you've already put in place between then and now that have made us a less inviting target for this?
Well, I think for one, we've really ramped up the tools that we've used in terms of an initial application within our beacon system to try to ward off intrusion, if you will, as well as making sure that the information that is put out there can be verified in some way. There's also and I was wrong, I looked it up, I said July for Nexus, it was actually May, but it was still 2021. So, but we've been working on, with our own analysts in terms of data analytics as much as we can to dig into the data and find out where we can apply the next pressure, or the next pressure point, if you will. Training the staff as much as we can. And in terms of staff augmentation, I've already gone over some of those numbers, and we've also increased the training, increased overtime, so that we can get more meaningful work out of the staff in that sense, that they are spending more time on the job and getting more training, so that if complex issues crop up, whether it's an adjudication or even a fraud issue, that they've got the tools to deal with it.
With the additional staffing you talked about, one of my questions is, do you know how many, because Accenture kind of ramped up over time, it's a big number now. Do you know what we were at last year? When did they ramp up? Do you have that information?
We started out with something in the order of 600 people in that contract, and now we're up to 1,800. So it's over the course of the year, it's ramped up steadily.
And I think you said, but I wasn't sure, that included project management oversight
Right,
for those staff.
in addition to the call centers.
So was the burden of overseeing the 10 new projects, all this stuff, was that part of some of these contracts, or did that fall onto the same staff now doing 3 times the work? Were you able to add additional DOL staff to
We have been adding
manage
DOL
these?
staff, and I will say everybody's working pretty much 7 days a week, but it's not, we haven't gone out and hired additional. We have some project managers we've hired, but most of this is our internal staff managing the contracts. But working closely with the project management staff in each of these vendors.
Okay. You had mentioned there was an audit or audits underway. Can you tell me about any high level, I want to share the wrong details, but internal audits that you all have done for process of control review, and LOA audit during any of this?
We have some in now, so that's very premature.
Okay. When you have those, can we get a appropriate summary?
Yeah, at the right time, we'll certainly share that information.
Thank you very much. And same question for third-party external audits. Have there been federal audits? Have you all had external parties come in?
We just had an entrance conference for another one of those
Yes.
last week, so they're coming.
Same thing at the appropriate time, if you could share that with us. And then this is just not fraud related, well, sort of is. I'm trying to figure out why state employees are getting phone calls saying from our HR and DOL about claims filed in our name. When we work for the state, we've got, we all use Workday, we use the same system. Why isn't that integrated? That just seems like an example of where, as a state, we've created a burdensome process where you all are finding out that 3 times have been in my name.
Right, I share the pain, but, and we have ramped it up so that we do an extra scrub when we see a state employee, because we know that there are fraudulent claims, that identity theft is rampant, and we understand that, so that we want to make sure that we can speed that process up as much as possible. We don't want to deny somebody, if there's somebody that was laid off and has a legitimate claim, we don't want to get them caught up, but we want to make sure that we don't bottle them, grind this thing down to a halt by investigating these things. We give it an extra scrub. We do that.
So do we have rules that allow you to say integrate with Workday or with us, or are there things preventing that? Would that be a takeaway from this, that we need to remove some of those barriers to automate anything?
Well, I believe we already are, but I'll follow that up with you to make sure.
Thank you. Andy?
Mr. Schaffel. Mr. Schaffel, thank you, Mr. Hilbrand. Mr. Schaffel is someone who is intimately involved with fraud detection, data processing, et cetera, and is probably the state's leading expert on how to protect the public treasury. Andy, go ahead. Any questions you have? Take your time. No, there's no rush here.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Secretary. As you noted, we've had conversations about working together collaboratively. I know it's the same people that are coming after us. It's very organized schemes. I think it makes sense as good government for us to perhaps pull some resources and go after things together. I certainly wish we'd done this before. We'd be in a better place for sure. But I want to just follow up with the comptroller's notes about how important it is to go back. It's not something anybody wants to do. It's not a comfortable thing to do. But the most important data we have is learning about the fraud that's been perpetrated, right? And that's how you learn how to stop it. And I think your numbers are relatively impressive. 1.4 million claims determined fraudulent. You have a 92% accuracy rate. So of which you flagged, 1.6 million, 1.5 of those were indeed fraud, right? And, we have those two, right? False positives. Our rate is closer to about 50% of the time where we're accurate. And I think it's because we're casting a wider net. So that accuracy rate is almost too high. I would encourage you to look at that and to broaden that out, which it sounds like you're doing with LexisNexis and continuing to look out. So I think that's right. And I'll just say that with that 1.5 million, the 92% accuracy, there is a strategy that the organized fraudsters perpetrate. It's a red herring strategy, where they hit you with stuff they know they're going to find. They know you're going to see those. They know you're going to hit them. They know you're going to focus on them. And while you're focused over there, they're sneaking in over on the other side. You know, these folks are crafty. They've got folks that are probably better educated than many of our folks, and they're almost sitting in sweatshops, just cranking out fraudulent financial transactions to you, to us, to the federal government, to banks, to insurance companies. It's big business. And
we know they learn quickly.
yeah, that's right, they do. And they learn just as much when you deny something. They learn what your defenses are. They're poking and prodding, right? It's just like a military intervention. They're poking and prodding. They're learning how to react. It's an ongoing battle, and you have to constantly adapt. And again, I look forward to anything we can do to assist, and I really want to partner on that side with you. I do want to try to figure out some of the numbers just so I can make sure we understand everything as we start to go through. We have 2.8 million total new claims, right, throughout kind of the COVID period. 826,000 of those were completed claims. Some of them were rolled, not proper.
Right.
But about 678,000 of them did receive benefits. What is a complete claim versus an incomplete claim? It's different than fraud, right?
Right. It means that they have completed the application and actually certified made their weekly certification. But if for some reason that it didn't pay, it could be any number of reasons, but they completed the application and completed their weekly certification.
Okay. So we've got about 826,000 that were completed claims. We've got 1.5 million, 1.5 million that were called fraud, roughly. So we're at 2.3 million. We've got 20,000 that are pending. So we end up just a little bit over 2.3 million, but we have 2.8 million new claims, which is a bogey of about 500,000. Is there another bucket of claims out there?
I thought there was another 500,000. Well, I will find out, Andy. I was thinking that was the 2021 claims, but I think that 2.8 should have covered everything, so I'll find out.
Yeah, the 2.8 itself is just amazing. That's more than the number of households we have in the state of Maryland, right?
Right.
It shows you how many claims you're taking on the fraud side. It's quite remarkable. Thinking about, I'm going to kind of pivot more to customer service here. One of the pending claims issued is conflicting information between the claimant and the claimant's employer. Can you give just an example of what this conflicting information commonly is?
Most basically, if someone says they were laid off and the employer says no, they were fired for misconduct. But that's kind of the run of the mill.
Right. Generally, if you quit yourself, right, you don't qualify for the benefits, right? Okay. There was something that was included in some notes you sent over, but not, it didn't show up in the presentation. I thought it was a very good management chart. It kind of showed the approved claims, when they came in, and how quick you were to pay them out. You familiar with the one I'm thinking of?
I think I am, yes.
It's got the months running vertically, and with the workload, and then the number of days across. And naturally, April 30th, 2020 is the peak, right? That's when we really shut everything down. 144,000 workload that was worked through to 90% within 21 days. So very impressive. Then as we get up to July, the workload falls to just 21,000, but more than roughly 70% of those took more than 70 days to approve. It almost seems like this is working in the inverse, where you had your heaviest workload and you were very efficient, and then as time wore on, some of that efficiency wore off.
Well, yeah, I think you're right, and when you start in that 21-day column, because that is the federal standard, they want 87% of our initial claims paid within 21 days. And when you start the chart, yes, in that column, we are in the 90% range. And we fell off dramatically, but we worked our way back up into the 50% range. So we are working through it. We know that we couldn't ramp up fast enough, effectively. So we're getting there. But I'd like to think the end is in sight, but it won't be in sight until we get all these claims paid.
Watching a new variant, right?
Right.
We're all crossing our fingers. Okay, so it just, you've had to put out some emergency contracts, and yours is a unique business, right? Where, as I think you showed, a normal year, you have 100,000 claims, right? Seasonal workers, probably pretty easy to detect a pattern there in a normal year. And even in the Great Recession, it was much more spread out. Hopefully we'll never see anything like this again. But for example, even in the Great Recession, your workload must pick up to a level that it wouldn't make sense for you to normally sustain that kind of level of operations, right? So is it something possible where you can have contingency contracts where you can shift, without having to necessarily go through a procurement process at that point? You've already been through it, and you can pivot, service, bring in outside support, I suppose.
I think it's a good idea in the sense of the call center with the adjudication issues that there are DOL rules about merit staff, and they've suspended for the moment, but they're going to kick back in soon enough, so we have to be ready to pivot when that happens. And I think you're right, using a contract to help us with fluctuations like that, temporary fluctuations, is always a good idea. That's certainly something we want to avail ourselves of as often as we can to make sure we don't go down this road.
Okay, I think I'm complete.
Thank you very much, Andy. Sandy Zink is an incredibly valuable member of our team and is in charge of our general accounting division. Sandy, welcome and thank you for asking whatever questions you want.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. So my question's.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt for a minute. That wasn't even on the microphone, but I was praising Sandy Zink because she's an important member of our team and head of our GAD division, and so I'm delighted that she's with us to ask a few questions from David. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So my questions are really focused on what's near and dear to my heart, which is first accounting. And so what I'd like to ask about is when you were talking about the contracts and the transition from BMA to Wells, so that's really where I'm going to focus on two questions that I have. Specifically, as you are transitioning the accounts, which I know I've read, it looks like it's extended to October 1st or fully converted over. How are you gathering the banking data to pay people at Wells under the check and the direct deposit, and how are you validating that? The reason where I'm going is, as you know, bad guys tend to target ACH banking information first place they go. Are you have you incorporated a trusted advisor concept in your validation process, or what are the controls you have in place?
Where we are using their service, their account validation service.
Are you using Wells?
Wells,
the EWS system, or the warning system, or what are you doing?
we are using it, their early warning system.
How's that going?
It's going well. When we get a hiccup, we do a micro deposit to try to validate. If it doesn't come back, or if there's questions on it, we'll send them like a micro deposit to see if they can validate this account with, deposits under $1 to tell us what's going into that account, make sure that we're talking to the right person. In addition, we're using, for the checks, we're using positive pay. So no check gets paid that wasn't fully identified on the list that we sent to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is doing the check printing and mailing for us as well.
Positive pay though gets you to the right, to a valid bank account, but how are you validating that I'm trying to pay Susie Smith and it's really Susie Smith? Is your EWS picking that up, or I'm just curious as to what the volume of misses are.
I may have used the wrong term with the positive pay, but we do use both on the direct deposit, your early warning system, as well as the evaluation service from Wells for the checks as well. So I'll get you what that's called.
Yeah, I'd like to know how that's going, because it's something we're certainly be very interested in learning about. The other question I had is, because you are phasing out of the DNA, the plastic cards, and going to Wells, how are you handling the transition of cash from DNA? There's not where the state, where the books at for just a minute. How are you transitioning cash that you're gonna move from DNA to Wells? Any idea how much money is still left to be tapped on the DNA account?
I don't have that data right now, but I know that that's going to be coming very shortly.
Okay.
As soon as we have that information, I'll let you know exactly what, we're working with the treasurer's office to get all that complete, so that they move enough accounts to transfer, but exactly what's in those accounts, I don't have all that detail yet.
What do you think, I mean, if you had a guess, what would your guess be as to why there would be any balance left in there after all the plastic is issued?
Well, in some cases, people just don't use it. We know that. They may have the funds on the card, but they don't use all the funds on the card right away. So we have to contact them and say, please, these cards are going to become inactive at some point, and get your funds off the card.
Okay, you guys have keeping some ledger, again, I'm trying to get to where we're gonna close, right? Just making sure that any funds in there that are not really used, not really liability or reporting properly. So, folks, have any questions, please call, because we'd like to get this settled correctly.
I agree. As soon as we get that information from the Bank of America, we'll let you know.
Could I jump in and follow up on that? That might be an interesting note to follow, just thinking about a way to continue to follow some of the fraud. We had an instance 10 years ago, it was a scheme where it involved paper checks, and we were able to come onto it pretty quickly because the checks were taking so long to cash. It was completely abnormal. And they just weren't able to really deal with the paper. They perpetrated a fraud they couldn't really deal with. And I would imagine that would be pretty, analog to the cards, right? The paper check is pretty much the same as the debit card. So I think that might be something, that might be a good avenue for your folks. But
So there's something we will look at.
Yeah.
Sandy, are you all through? Thank you very much. David, it's been a long afternoon, and I don't mean to put you in this role. How long have you been with the Department of Labor?
20 years.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, you're eligible for full pensions. That's excellent. But let me just say for the closing that we're estimating that up to $2 billion of the $13 billion was sent to fraudsters. That may be conservative based on what we're finding from other states right now. We sent almost all of the topics and questions we raised to you today, to your department, 2 weeks ago. And frankly, I just find it unacceptable and frustrating that the department, and I'm not blaming you, David, is just completely unprepared to answer even partially our questions. You've said multiple times that you either don't know the answer or that you'll have your staff follow up with us after the meeting. It was obviously our desire that some of these questions at least could be answered today with some data and some information. And please make sure that your follow-up occurs promptly. This is the single greatest highway robbery of the national treasury and the state treasury in Maryland's history and in the country's history. And it is something that we need to get to the bottom of. We need to fully understand it. We're going to. There's no way anything's going to be hidden from this work group on this subject because, look, I'm a politician. I would hate to have all sorts of bad discussion of what has happened in our agency, perhaps, to be made public. And nonetheless, and I'm sure the governor and the secretary are very, very concerned about providing truthful, accurate data that they have right now on this fraud issue. But we're going to get to the bottom of it because we have to. And if you can just alert all your colleagues that we are coming for this information. We're going to get it. There's no way a politician is going to stand up and say, oh no, everything's just fine. We had a 92% success rate on 1.5 million fraud requests. We know that that's hiding something. And we're coming for it because we do not want to have the taxpayers exposed to I hesitate to say cover up, but it's basically a curtain has been dropped around the fraud issue because obviously as politicians, we don't like to be associated with that, with bad news. This is not a bad news issue. This is an issue that we need to have the data on. And you guys have it, so make sure your colleagues know that we need it. And the experts that are here with me, folks that will be looking at this, to the extent some of it needs to be confidential, that's okay. But once again, big situation. We need the truth. And I'm not blaming you personally. I'm just taking advantage of your role. You're a longtime employee of the agency. It's not your fault. It's the umbrella that has been dropped on this. And thank you very much. And if I could buy you a beer now and take you out and somehow cool you off a little bit, but give my regards to the secretary and the budget secretary and also the governor. We need this. They cannot hide it under a rock and pretend it's going to go away. It's too big. It's too massive a fraud to sit on and think, oh, well, everybody's going to be convinced with our description that everything's under control. We need the facts. Thank you for coming. And thank you for participating. And not sure who's joined us here, but it's very nice. And anybody who's on the program right now, stay tuned because this issue is far from over. Thank you.